Hi guys, welcome to my channel, Amie Howard Art. I'm Amie and today I have a tutorial video for you. So today's tutorial I'm going to show you how you can render wet looking realistic fur. So let's get straight into this. And the basis of drawing realistic looking wet fur is identifying your lights and your darks. So identifying those different values within your reference photo. And when you're mapping out your outline, you need to make sure that you sort of outline these so that you know where they are when you come to add your colour. So one of the first things that I like to do is to go in with a sharp dark pencil. I like to use a dark sepia pencil rather than a black. And what I do is I just look at that reference photo and I identify where those darkest areas are. And to do this, what I do is just squint at my reference photo, because when you squint at your reference photo, you are able to analyze those lights and those dark areas a lot better. So by squinting at your reference photo, you can identify those and then you can apply that to your drawing. So what I do is just make sure that that dark sepia pencil is really sharp. I go in with extremely light pressure and I map out the shapes that those dark areas are making. And whilst I'm mapping out these dark areas, I'm keeping in mind all the different clumps and the different areas of the fur. And it's much easier to work and look at your fur in that respect rather than think of it as fur and each individual strand. So it's much easier to think of things in terms of clumps and shapes. So I just keep that in mind and transfer that to my paper as I'm using that pencil. So I make sure that's really sharp, using really light pressure. That is absolutely essential. And that is one really important tip that I can give you, is to make sure that you use really light pressure, because then you can go back in and erase if you find out that you've made a mistake or mapped something in incorrectly, made a wrong shape or something like that. If you use light pressure, you can go in and you can erase that. If you go in with a hard pressure initially, it's going to be really difficult to lift that and you'll end up having to start over again if you're not careful. So I just go in, map everything out, go over the entire piece. I usually work from left to right and top to bottom. So once all of those shapes and all of those dark values are mapped out in the wet fur, then I like to go in and add the base layers. And for the base layers, I like to use the really light pencils, and I often use a warm grey one and a cold grey one. And those are really good neutral tones to add as a base layer to absolutely any colour. So when I'm adding these base layers down, all I'm doing is just shading back and forth. I'm making sure that my pencil is really nice and sharp and I'm using it really lightly, and I'm just following the direction of the fur. So the key here again is to use that really light pressure to build your layers. Once I've added those two base layers, then I like to go in with a Caran d'Ache Luminance white pencil, and I like to add this down because it creates a really nice blend and it creates a really nice surface for you to work on with your subsequent colours. So when I'm adding the white pencil, I'm going over absolutely the entire area, going over that dark sepia as well. Just helps to create that really nice blend between those base layers and those dark colours. Once I've done that, then I like to go back in with a dark sepia pencil, make sure it's really nice and sharp, and just pick out those dark areas again, just redarken them a little bit. So now we've got our dark areas and we've got our base layers, and we've sort of set ourselves up for those lighter tones. Now it's time to go in and start to add the midtones. And for the midtones, I like to use those darker coloured pencils, and I like to use them lightly and add multiple layers, because I feel that that creates a really nice depth and you can really sort of judge the tone a lot better than just going in with a dark pencil. So I like to use those dark pencils really lightly, use that really light pressure rather than hard pressure with a dark pencil. So the technique which I use when adding these midtones is completely different to what I used when I was adding those base layers. So when we're adding the midtones, what I'm doing is just using some fur lines. So I'm creating some lines that go along the length of the fur in the direction of the fur. So I'm not shading back and forth and using that motion with my pencil. What I'm doing is putting my pencil down onto the paper and then flicking it towards the end of the stroke in the direction of the fur, and that creates a really nice blend. It gives a really nice soft look. Fur is often really soft looking, so it helps to create that effect by adding those pencil marks down in that way. So all I do is just use that technique, just putting the pencil down, creating these really long tapered lines all over the piece in the direction of the fur. Once I've done that a couple times, then it's time to sort of pick out some of the highlighted areas. So the highlighted areas are the areas which are the brightest on your reference photo, and again, if you're having trouble distinguishing those lighter areas, just have a little squint at your reference photo and that will help you to identify those lighter colours against those darker colours. You'll often find the highlighted areas sitting directly next to those darker areas, and this is where I said it's really important to get that sort of balance between your values exactly right. That's what's going to really create this realistic look for this wet fur, is having these highlighted areas directly next to these darker areas. So to add in those highlighted areas, all I do is take that sharp Caran d'Ache luminance white pencil or any kind of really opaque white pencil and just add in those highlights. I also add a little glaze of colour over those highlights, and I like to use a blue. For my reference, the sort of tone, overall tone of the fur was blue, so I just added a little bit of a blue colour here. But once I've added in that highlight and just sort of glazed it over a little bit, then I like to go in with the dark sepia once more and really add some really dark, harsh lines directly next to that highlighted area, and that's going to help create that contrast. It's going to help to create that wet look. But I don't necessarily like to leave it looking really harsh. I like to blend it out a little bit, and that sort of gives it a more natural, realistic effect. So once I've gone in with that dark sepia directly next to that sort of highlighted area, then I like to just lift the pressure off my pencil using even less pressure just to blend into the surrounding areas. If you was just to leave it really stark and directly black and then directly white, you wouldn't get a really realistic look. So it is really important to make sure that you do blend into your surrounding areas as well. It's just the way nature works. You don't really find really harsh, bold lines of colour next to one another in nature. You want to try and create some kind of blend between the two. So I like to go in with a sort of semi-hard pressure on those darker areas and then just lift the pressure off my pencil as I'm working more towards the lighter areas or the surrounding areas of that dark part. Once I've gone in and done that, then I like to look overall over the piece and see if there are any adjustments that need to be made. So I look again at the balance of the contrasts, balance of the values, have a little squint at my reference photo and see if the darks and the lights are working on my piece corresponding to the reference photo. So I make sure that that is exactly what I'm seeing on the reference photo, what I've drawn. And if any changes need to be made, if things need to be darker or I need to just add a little bit more of a highlight somewhere, then I just go in with the relevant colours, the relevant pencils, and add those areas in. And that is pretty much it. It's a really simple technique. All you're doing is just mapping out your values to begin with, mapping in those really dark areas, then going in and working from your light all the way up to your dark, just using really light pressure. You're also using a mixture of techniques. You're beginning with a shading technique, just adding those base layers, and then working up to a real detailed fur technique by using some tapered lines in the direction of the fur. To really create that wet look, you just want to make sure that you have that balance of contrast between your lights and your darks correct. What you need to keep in mind is the clumps of fur, so you need to just make sure that you keep it in terms of like little clumps. When fur is wet, it's a lot easier to identify those clumps as well. So the tip of the clump and the very top side of the clump is going to be your lightest area, and then the sides and surrounding areas are going to be your darkest areas. You also want to make sure that you really highlight those really bright whiter areas by adding some darker colour directly next to them. It's just going to really make them pop and really make them come at you. So that's pretty much it for this tutorial. You can apply this to any kind of coloured fur. You can apply it to really light sandy coloured fur. You can apply it to red fur. You can also apply it to absolutely any length. So the one that I demonstrated here was more of like a mid-length fur. If you're wanting to create wet fur on shorter fur, all you would do is just make shorter marks. And if you was creating a longer wet fur, all you would do is elongate your marks. It's pretty simple. So I really hope you have enjoyed this, and I hope that you can apply this to any of your future drawings. If you have found this helpful and you like this technique, make sure you give it a big thumbs up. If you are new around here and you loved this tutorial, then make sure you hit that subscribe button and tick that bell icon as well to be notified of all of my future videos. And speaking of future videos, there are some directly over there for you to go and watch, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!